Here's something that will bother you once you see it. The dumbest decisions in history were made by the smartest people in the room, not the confused ones, not the uneducated ones, the brilliant ones, the ones with the credentials, the track record, the reputation, the ones everyone looked to when things got complicated. And the reason they made those decisions, the actual mechanism behind it, is something nobody in the self-improvement space wants to say out loud, because it indicts all of us. Knowledge without wisdom is just sophisticated stupidity. That's it. That's the whole thing. But stay with me, because understanding that sentence at surface level is exactly the kind of trap I'm talking about. There's a specific type of failure that only visits people who have learned a lot. It doesn't show up in the life of someone who knows they don't know things. It finds the person who has read the books, studied the patterns, done the work, and arrived at the deeply comfortable conclusion that they have a handle on things, and then it waits. Because a person who believes their judgment is calibrated stops checking their judgment, and an unchecked instrument, no matter how precise, eventually gives you a reading that gets you killed. I learned this in a way I didn't see coming and still think about. A few years ago, I was building something I cared about, and a person entered my world who seemed almost designed to fit into it. They spoke my language. They referenced the right ideas. They understood my values, my framework, my vision in a way that felt rare. And because I had spent serious time studying people, because I believed I had developed real discernment, I didn't just trust them. I trusted them with things I should have protected. When they moved against me, the betrayal wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was realizing that my confidence in my own perception had been the actual vulnerability. My intelligence didn't protect me. It handed them the door and stepped aside. That is the trap. And it's almost perfectly designed, because the smarter you are, the more invisible it is. Watch what happens to Light Yagami in Death Note. Supernatural intelligence, genuine strategic genius. For a while he is untouchable, and it is genuinely impressive to watch. But there is a moment, subtle enough that you almost miss it, where he stops questioning his own conclusions and starts worshiping them. He doesn't get beaten by someone smarter. He gets beaten because certainty made him predictable. The writers of that show understood something about intelligence that most people spend a lifetime missing. The higher you climb on raw knowledge alone, the more catastrophic the fall when wisdom isn't underneath it. The Romans watched this pattern kill people they desperately needed. Nero had Seneca in his court, one of the most penetrating minds in recorded history, a man who understood power and human nature in ways that still feel modern 2,000 years later. And Nero would sit across from him, visibly bored, already decided, already certain. Within a few years of dismissing that voice, he had descended into a paranoia so complete it's hard to believe he ever functioned. He wasn't stupid. He was knowledgeable without wisdom. In a person with power, that combination is one of the most destructive forces that can exist. But you don't need a throne for this to apply. It applies every time you walk into a conversation already knowing what the other person is going to say. Every time feedback arrives and the defensive wall goes up before you've processed the words. Every time your mental model of a situation becomes so solid, so detailed, so earned, that you forget it is still just a model. Here's the distinction that actually matters, because people collapse these two things constantly. Knowledge is accumulated information. Wisdom is what develops when you've lived inside that information long enough to understand what it gets wrong. A knowledgeable person can explain how trust works psychologically. A wise person can catch themselves in the moment when their desire to trust someone is overriding their actual read of whether that person has earned it. That gap between understanding a concept and recognizing when your own emotions are hijacking it in real time is exactly where sophisticated stupidity lives. John Stuart Mill read ancient Greek before most children learned to read anything. He was intellectually extraordinary in ways that still feel shocking, and then he collapsed entirely in his 20s, a breakdown that took years to come back from, not because he lacked knowledge, because his entire inner architecture had been built on the accumulation of information with no room left for anything else, no emotional development, no capacity for meaning outside of achievement. He had filled the cup so completely there was nothing left that made the information survivable. This is the shadow side of self-improvement that almost nobody names. There is a version of personal development that is just ego in a lab coat. It collects frameworks and models and vocabulary and uses them not to genuinely change, but to feel superior to the version of itself that used to not know these things. It reads about humility without practicing it. It learns the language of emotional intelligence without doing the actual work of becoming emotionally intelligent. It stays stuck, dressed in the costume of growth, wondering why the same problems keep returning in different packaging. The Zen tradition captures this with a story that sounds simple until it doesn't. A master pours tea into a student's already full cup. Tea spills everywhere. The student asks why he keeps pouring. The master says nothing, because the answer is obvious. You cannot receive what you are too full to hold. And the terrifying part of that story is that fullness rarely feels like arrogance. It feels like confidence. It feels like preparation. It feels like the entirely reasonable conclusion that you have thought about this enough. Now let me ask you something. Why does more knowledge sometimes make people worse at living, not better? The answer is that knowledge without the practice of questioning itself calcifies. It stops being a lens and starts being a filter. You don't see reality through it anymore. You see reality after it has been processed, sorted, and confirmed by everything you already believe. The technical term is confirmation bias. The lived experience is just being wrong about things with increasing sophistication. The Stoics built a daily practice around catching exactly this. Before acting on any strong impression, they asked one question: does this actually reflect reality, or does this reflect what I need reality to be? That pause, that small gap between impression and action, is where wisdom is developed. Most people never build it because the ego experiences self-questioning as an attack, not an upgrade. Marcus Aurelius wrote his journals privately, never for publication, because they were not philosophy. They were him catching himself, catching the rationalizations dressed as reasoning, catching the certainties that had no business being certain. He was the most powerful person alive, and he spent his private hours interrogating his own mind because he understood that without that interrogation, power takes you somewhere you never agreed to go. So here is the one practical thing worth carrying out of this. Every area of your life where you feel completely settled, where your judgment feels solid and proven and beyond question, that is precisely where your blind spots are hiding. Not the uncertain areas, those keep you alert. The certain ones are where the traps are set. The relationship pattern you've had for a decade without ever seriously examining it. The professional instinct you trust so completely, you stopped pressure testing it. The read you have on people that feels so accurate you've long since stopped checking whether the evidence actually supports it. Knowledge without wisdom is a library inside a burning building, impressive right up until it's helpless. The most dangerous thing about being smart is that it makes failure feel like a story about other people. And by the time you realize it's your story, the chapter is already written. You probably know a lot. The question is whether you have the wisdom to know what your knowledge cannot see. Because that gap, the thing your knowledge is blind to, that is exactly where the next mistake is already waiting. And here's what makes it worse. You won't feel it coming, you'll feel prepared. Thank you for watching. If you want to see the videos YouTube keeps shadow banning, the posts the algorithm refuses to show, and the content that gets buried every single time, I just released a Patreon. That's where the real stuff lives. Join now before the next wave of suppression hits. Click the link in the description and unlock everything they don't want you to see.